Hi, thank you, Anna. I also want to thank Women Who Code and the organizers for having me here tonight. A little bit about me. My name is Mina. I use pronouns she and her. I am a software engineer at a consulting agency called Tandem in Chicago, and I have been there for roughly 4 years. And if you want to get in touch, I can be found on Twitter. So I came to the realization, startling realization recently, that I no longer fall into the category of early career. I had quite the existential crisis, to be quite honest, an experience that sparked this presentation, Managing Out Strategies for Leveling Up. I'm here to share my experiences leveling up both practically and psychologically, and how I gained the skills and mental readiness to progress as a mid-level engineer and beyond. So in January of 2020, the project that I had been staffed on for over a year got a contract extension. This extension expanded the team considerably. We more than doubled the number of engineers, bringing on people of varying skill levels, including new project leads. This change in team makeup also affected how I fit in practically overnight. So I was in a fairly unique position where I was not in an official leadership role, having finished my engineering apprenticeship right before joining this project a year prior. But I was also the longest tenured engineer on this project team, at a little over a year, which was a long time relative to other projects at my company. So I had more code base and client familiarity than most of my teammates. Essentially, less than 2 years into my second career as a software engineer, I became a person that the team counted on to be self-sufficient, as well as provide support and guidance to my brand new team. I felt uneasy to be thrust into the pseudo-leadership position, where I had a lot of opinions, but no real seat at the decision-making table. At that stage of my career, I still had a lot to learn, but I also had enough project experience to support my team. So I struggled with what I should be focusing on. I wanted to continue to grow as an engineer, both technically and as a team player, support my new teammates the best that I could, and continue to provide value to this project. And being the overachiever that I am, I wanted to do all these things at the same time. Through a lot of trial and error, I did manage to come up with ways to thrive in this position. They fell into 3 general categories: set good examples for the team and model collaborative behaviors, be creative in ways that I share knowledge and use existing tools to achieve new goals, and embrace the role and take ownership and initiative. And by focusing on these strategies, I managed to come out the other side a more confident engineer and a more empathetic teammate, all while helping to take this product successfully into production nationwide. So every team has a set of processes that makes it the most productive. When new members join a project team, they have to learn the way that the team works. And there are so many different ways to communicate this information, like documentation or verbal explanation. Now, I remember in school that whenever we had a writing assignment, my teachers will always tell me, show, don't tell. So I opted to use my actions to show my new teammates our existing processes rather than using directives. I was worried about coming off as condescending, and leading by example felt more appropriate for my position on this team. And actions leave a deeper impression because the impact of the behavior was more immediate and obvious, rather than talking about theoretical benefits of doing things a certain way. We could find opportunities for pair programming or collaboration so that they see we are a team that works together. Or we could be open about asking for help early and often to convey that expectation and empower other people to do the same. And after spending so much time on this project, I also realized that I held in my head historical knowledge and information and context about past decisions. This realization surprised me because I was used to being one of several people who knew these things, but most of them have since moved on to other projects. And suddenly I looked around and I was the only person left. I have worked with people who hold information very close to themselves and resisted sharing with the rest of the team. And I knew that this was not the type of leader I wanted to one day become. So I reminded my teammates often that I'm always available to answer their questions, to pair with them, or just to be a rubber ducky. I also listened closely during daily team syncs to what my teammates were working on and how that's all going. I try to pick up any uncertainties or blockers that the team might be facing, and I offer to help where I can, emphasizing that I didn't always know the answer, but I was willing to collaborate with them to work through it. This is also an opportunity to identify if any context or previous decisions needed to be shared. Our project had a really long history, and there were a lot of implementation ideas that had already been explored. For example, a new engineer might not know that we had already done a spike previously to investigate whether we should raise errors in our application using the GraphQL library or let Rails, the tool that we were using, handle it. And we decided ultimately that Rails was better suited to our use cases, so their time might be better spent somewhere else, solving new problems. Taking the initiative to suggest that pairing together opens the door to collaborating with my team. And when I was an early career engineer, I had often needed help working through a task, but I was too afraid to ask my team for it because I didn't want to bother them. I was always relieved when they offered, though. So once I stepped into a more experienced position, I made sure to be the one to speak up, giving my teammates a chance to take me up on the offer to pair without them having to ask. Pairing with the team was not solely for their benefit, though. I'm a proponent of pair programming as one of the best ways to learn. It allowed me to practice various technical concepts and be exposed to different styles of code so that I can improve upon my own. For example, a couple of the new engineers picked up a ticket that would really benefit from being remodeled and refactored using single table inheritance. I had been introduced to this concept on the project previously, but hadn't really used it, and they had never heard of it. So we spent some time working together and improved the extensibility of the code. In introducing the two of them to the concept of single table inheritance, I personally gained a better practical understanding of it. And explaining concepts like this to my new teammates solidified my knowledge, and I was surprised actually with how much I knew about Ruby and Rails. Another place where we can flex our technical muscles and gain confidence in our own abilities is by participating in code reviews. A number of my new teammates joined our project without knowing Ruby, and even though I wouldn't call myself an expert, I was still able to provide insights about the language, like Ruby implicitly returns whatever the last line evaluates to in a method, so you don't need any of these lines here. As a reviewer, I tend to approach PR reviews as another opportunity to collaborate with my teammates. I try to be thorough in my reviews, reading the code changes and testing the functionality carefully. Provide both compliments and critiques with empathy. I like to think in the feedback framework ASK, which stands for actionable, specific, and kind. And I offer to pair with them after I've made a complex suggestion to remove any potential for miscommunication. And if you're interested in more details about giving and receiving code reviews, I gave a presentation about it at PyCascades last year that can be found on Twitter. By setting good examples for my team and using my actions to model collaborative behaviors, I grew as an engineer and deepened my own understanding of Ruby by teaching those who were new to it. I supported my teammates by providing technical guidance through pairing and code reviews. And I added value to my project by making sure that we had a consistent process. When these expectations are clear and the team is up to speed on them, we work more efficiently and deliver better quality code. As part of our onboarding process to the project, the new engineers got a quick demo of the application and a high-level walkthrough of the code. While these were valuable for understanding the big picture, in order to implement a new feature or improve functionality, we needed to dig deeper for more specific details. And instead of saying everything you need to know can be found in the code, I use tools built into our workflow to better share information about the code base and helped my teammates be more productive. For example, I contributed to implementation discussions by adding to the ticket descriptions on our Jira board. Our leads and product managers created the tickets and filled in business requirements, but it's usually up to the engineers to translate those into implementation details. Our goal as a team was always to have enough common knowledge, shared resources, and information in the descriptions that any of us can pick up any ticket and be ready to work on it. Everyone on our team was more than capable of finding their way in the code base. But being new to a project or coding in general, though, might mean that we take a few more detours along the way. The information that I add to the description of a ticket was meant to be the beginnings of a roadmap, pointing generally in a direction toward implementation. It was never so detailed that it dictated how they implemented the task. They were always framed as suggestions rather than you should statements or directives. And it can be as simple as, well, take a look at this model. It might be related to this task, or we have an established pattern that could be really useful for you here, and tell them where to find those examples. At the end of every sprint, we come together as an engineering team to go over the planned work for the next sprint. This is where everyone will look through the information on each ticket and discuss the details. This is also where we would decide if a ticket needed to be broken down into multiple smaller tasks to make implementation and code review simpler. In these meetings, I always made sure to ask questions and raise any edge cases. This is an area that I very specifically worked hard to improve. When I was starting out, I kept quiet in these meetings because I didn't process new information about code or the client's business as quickly as I do now. And by the time I formulated a question in a conversation, everyone else has already moved on. But I observed the more experienced engineers around me with their thoughtful comments and questions until I learned how to think like an engineer and understood what is important in different conversations. I wanted to empower the team by exposing my own knowledge gaps. It's important to set an example for my newer teammates and demonstrate how to contribute in these discussions, like my previous teammates did for me. When early career engineers see someone more experienced admit to not knowing the answers, it sets an example. And as this tweet says, it normalizes admitting gaps and demonstrates how to respond. By using creative avenues to spread knowledge to the rest of the team, I grew as an engineer because speaking my understanding allowed others to challenge me. Incorrect assumptions don't survive long in the open. I supported my teammates by helping them move past square one when staring down a new task. And I made sure that our requirements fulfilled the needs of the clients by thinking over edge cases and considering the risks. At the beginning of this presentation, we talked about the trouble I had reconciling my project experience with my actual role on the team. That while I held the most context, I wasn't in an official leadership role. But eventually, after a lot of introspection and mentorship, I decided to embrace it. Someone smart told me once that we don't always lead from official positions of leadership, that there were plenty of opportunities for learning and practicing leadership skills, whatever our titles might be. So I started taking initiative and served almost like a second in command for my lead, who was spread pretty thin. The time and experience I had on this project moved me from early career solidly into a mid-level engineer. And in this new and scarier place, I realized that when I get an idea or identify a specific need to be filled, I should take action. As I became more experienced as a software engineer, fewer people would chime in and tell me what I should be doing. My leads expected me to be self-sufficient and to help rally the team into a productive one. No one was going to tell me what the project needs because I was becoming that person. So I started doing things like writing documentation that others didn't think of or volunteering for small process-related tasks. When we were onboarding all the new engineers to the project at once, I realized that we really dropped the ball on having clearly documented processes to introduce someone to the project. So as we fumbled through the onboarding process at the beginning of the contract period, I started creating documentation for the next time that we have to onboard someone new. The goal was to create a one-stop shop for everything new engineers need to ramp up, as well as clear instructions so anyone on the team can lead the onboarding process. Writing documentation isn't an engineering team's favorite part of the job. So I made myself the person who took these tasks on with the intention to prevent the team from getting into a similar situation later down the road. That was the moment that I really settled into this new stage of my career. Rather than waiting around for someone else to do the thing, I just took responsibility for it. I also volunteered to take on various small tasks, things like managing pair rotations. We were a pairing by default team, and that meant each ticket on the board will be picked up for implementation by 2 engineers at once. And in order to spread out the knowledge and make sure that pairings are fair, we had a biweekly rotation that lived in a spreadsheet. This sounds super simple. Fill in the cells with the name of each engineer on the team, rotate the names sprint to sprint so that everyone had an assigned pair that changed every 2 weeks. However, there are a number of things to consider that required more thought, like vacations, or who might already have knowledge in the planned work. Managing this spreadsheet was a task that didn't require a lead's experience and skills. By taking it off their plate, they would have more bandwidth to handle the really important things, like managing the roadmap, prioritizing client requests, and coordinating with designers and product managers. Essentially, I assigned myself the role of Commander Riker to my leads, Captain Picard. And I delegated the smaller responsibilities for them. And as a result, they didn't have to perform these tasks, nor did they even really have to worry about them. In a way, I magically disappear tasks from their plate. By really taking ownership and embracing the position that I was in, I got to practice leadership skills from a less demanding or risky position, laying the groundwork to one day take on the role officially. I gave the engineering team an alternative person to look to for leadership, who had more availability than the leads. And I was able to ease our leads load and let them use their expertise more appropriately. So in the end, I recognized I was incredibly privileged to be in that unique position where I had the knowledge and experience to step up without the demands of being a project lead. I set examples for my team in order to solidify process and convey expectations. I shared project knowledge with my new teammates using tools that were built into our development workflow, making it more organic and less condescending. I eventually embraced my position and got the chance to practice leadership skills in preparation for the next stage of my career. My initial confusion about where I fit into this new expanded project dynamic gave me the motivation to find or create opportunities so that I can get the most out of it. I worked really hard using these strategies to build trust with the client and stakeholders, as well as the people on my team. Right now, I am getting ready to take over as an official project lead for another client, and I have never felt more prepared. Now, you might already be doing all or some of these things that we have talked about without considering the benefits that you are providing to others as well as receiving yourself. When we act with more intention, we'll grow tremendously from even the most basic day-to-day interactions. Thank you. And also, if you liked what you heard and want to come work with us at Tandem, we are hiring senior and principal engineers as well as an engineering manager. And we have an apprentice program that I would also love to talk to you about. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mina. We have some time for questions, but I just want to say, as someone that rewatched all of The Next Generation in the last year, I'm like, yes, we all loved it. But yeah, we had some really great questions. So
Awesome.
the first one, which is actually the question that I wrote down, is from Joanne, and it's: being an overachiever myself, I have a hard time managing my time between juggling family time, career, learning. Any advice on how you have found best to juggle everything and still save some time for yourself?
Yeah, I think that prioritizing yourself is probably should be higher up on our list than most people, than where most people put it. I just think that it's really fascinating that the way that kind of like Joanne had phrased this question, that like saving time for herself is like at the end and almost like an afterthought in the question. So I think carving out a little bit of time for yourself and then fitting everything else around it is going to serve yourself better for sure. And well, for example, in this like last year plus of sort of like pandemic time, I couldn't handle all of those things that was listed, right? Like family time, myself, career, and continuous learning. So I've had to deprioritize a lot of the stuff. So I went into sort of what I call like chill mode, where I deprioritize continuous learning that's like outside of a work situation. So I worked 9 to 5, and then I used to write blogs and, like work on presentations and things like that. So I just kind of put all of that on the back burner to kind of take care of my mental health because of the pandemic and everything else, and had to draw a line.
Great question. I also think, if there are people higher than you, or once you get to that mid-level, if you can model that for early career people. There was also a comment, so appreciative of you calling them early career engineers, not junior engineers. So thank you for that.
Of
That was
course,
also appreciated. Okay, we have some time. Great. This is from Anne. Did your team and manager recognize your efforts as leadership skills? It's been my experience that doing such glue work is sometimes taken for granted. But if your team recognizes it and nurtures it, that is awesome.
Yeah, I'm really lucky, I think, at this company and at that on that project team in general, that a lot of my leads and manager kind of helped me find and create those opportunities, because I could voice sort of like my confusion, like I don't know what I'm like how I fit in on this team, and they made suggestions on things that I can do to kind of be on more solid ground in terms of the project team.
Great. And then Janet says, a lot of the tasks you're describing having taking on are less technical tasks. Do you worry about becoming your team's bookkeeper and losing out on writing code? She feels like that's happened to her in the past when she's tried that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a risk. I had to work through a lot of sort of time management strategies. Me and my manager worked together and tried out a lot of kind of ways to manage like more effectively manage my time and not let those sort of less technical tasks kind of like take over all of the time. But yeah, when I was first sort of moving up on that experience ladder and taking on a little more experience that's not just writing or tasks that are not just writing code, I definitely had a hard time balancing the two things. And it's, again, trial and error. What works for me also might not work for other people. So.
Thanks. Oh, yeah. Can you tell us more about this apprentice program that you did? We have a lot of boot camp grads in the audience that are really interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say, so I came up as an apprentice, as I had mentioned. And I think what is unique at the time, our apprentice program has been ongoing for many years. At least at the time, what's unique about it is that we bring on apprentices, and I was put in front of a client first day at the company. So a lot of people ask me, once you are promoted out of the apprenticeship and no longer an apprentice, how did your day-to-day change? And I always tell them they didn't. We put our apprentices through real life, like they're staffed on a project. They go to all of the same meetings as our other engineers. It's just that they have a little more kind of support and dedicated learning time than everyone else. If you're interested in finding out about the apprenticeship, you can follow my company on social media, Instagram or Twitter. We're at Made in Tandem, and that's usually where the application opening up any kind of news like that will show up first.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question as we wait but people please keep putting in more questions. But because, as I mentioned, I watch Star Trek,
Yes.
but in terms of the next generation, whose management style do you like the best?
Whose
Or,
management style?
what part of that, inspired you to use those GIFs in your slides?
Yeah.
Like everyone was loving it.
Yeah, I think it's when I started. Yes, Megan. I think when I started kind of describing what I was doing as second in command, I mean, like that the relationship between Picard and Riker are just so, like, at least to me, pretty iconic. But my favorite character from Next Generation is Data. Just the like kind of the disconnect he has with humanity made me connect with humanity even more in a way. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for answering that for me.
Of course.
And yes, and Anne says that Picard has more emotional intelligence. Great.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I wanted to know, from you a little bit more was, it's a little bit of a pivot from your talk, if that's okay. But I
No,
was
no.
reading recently some of the data that's been shown about the Great Resignation is that the most people leaving their jobs are mid-career people and
Mhm.
tech people, even higher than the healthcare industry. And so I'm wondering, I would love to chat with you a little bit about like what kind of retention programs like you could think of, or your experience as like a
Mhm.
mid-level person, like what keeps a mid-level person happy
Mhm.
in their career or in their position.
Yeah. I think a well-balanced engineering team is really important, especially I think in attracting folks who self-identify as mid-level, kind of like in a place of like understanding that they still need support from like more senior, more experienced engineers in their own technical learning, but also have the knowledge and capacity to mentor folks who are earlier career than they are. I think what I feel like I would what would cause me to leave a team is if I'm in the middle of the sort of career ladder and I don't feel like that there are folks who are more senior or like the capacity of folks who are more senior to give me the guidance I need from that team. So then in that case, I would personally, that would be kind of a top priority for me.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up, and we'll take a little screen break, or Shauna's doing the last call for questions or
Great.
just Star Trek chat. But is there any like final words, like if what people take away, what do you think is like the first thing that someone should wake up and think about tomorrow from you? If you could have people have one takeaway.
Yeah. I think that if we're lucky, and I am certainly count myself as very lucky in this company and this team to have the support that I have. But at the end of the day, you are your best advocate. So the things we talked about in my presentation are really just kind of recounting my experience. So obviously, like what works for me won't work for someone else. But again, like recognizing what you need and not being afraid to ask for it, I think is really important in our career growth in general.
Okay, we have one last question here, which was
Okay.
also a question that I had. How do you balance taking on leadership opportunities versus doing unpaid labor? Is there anything specific you had to do to make your work visible or be acknowledged? Or another ways of thinking about it is like, how do you define those boundaries and know when to stop volunteering for things?
Yeah, certainly. I think we were talking about sort of like time management and drawing a
Mhm.
line, making sure that are making sure that you are sort of not taking on too much. Um, and I don't want to go back to that, like strategies for time management for yourself, and finding out like what those strategies are that work for you. And conversations with your manager and leadership definitely will sort of like help you um, be like make sure that your work is visible to kind of the powers that be, and be acknowledged for like taking initiative. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. And then also if you don't find yourself in that position, it might be time to look around.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I'm gonna start to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Mina, for sharing
Yeah.
your talk. Oh, thank
Cool.
you. Thanks to my colleague for putting this. Um, oh, this is great.
Mm.
Hira was wondering if you happen to work in a global team and want to volunteer for tasks outside of your regional office, how should one approach keeping in mind there's a chance they won't recognize, acknowledge your work?
Ooh. I don't work for a global team. I work for a pretty small company actually, so I'm not sure I'm kind of the person that's most qualified to answer this question, but if you have the relationship with your managers, or if you don't like your managers or whoever your escalation, I think, path is between project lead and manager and beyond, I think conversations with them would be the best place to start. Just letting your kind of desires be known to people who could advocate for you when those opportunities come up.
Thanks. Okay, last call for any questions as I wrap up here. But thank you so much, Mina. It was a pleasure to meet you, on screen here. And thank you so much for your sharing your experience. And we'll be putting all the talks on YouTube in the coming weeks. So we'll get a chance to see Mina's amazing slides again. And so we'll take a quick screen break. All the attendees can go get some water, take a little walk, and then we'll join here on the main stage in about 7 minutes to hear from Kathy Jo about being a startup CTO. So we will see you all soon. And thank you, Mina.
Thank you, Anna.